Hello viewers, thank you for joining me. So, we didn't make it in time for Valentine's Day, clearly. I've had an unusually busy, stressful, kind of awful February this year, but I'd planned for this show to be our designated romance anime ever since it lost the poll for it last year. I ended up loving 365 Days to the Wedding, but when I initially set up that poll, I'd been worried it would be unfair. I'd heard so much more about A Sign of Affection, I wasn't sure anything would be on even footing against it. So I was honestly kind of shocked when it lost, and immediately pushed it a little higher up on my mental to-watch list. A Sign of Affection follows a college student named Yuki, who happens to be deaf. In a lot of instances where a character has one big trait that's likely to grab your attention, I tend to describe them as ordinary except for that one big thing, but that doesn't really feel accurate here. Yuki's character is pretty defined by her deafness. She went to a school for the deaf from kindergarten straight up through high school, and she was happy there. But as it came time for graduation, she started to realize how small her world was. This little bubble she's existed in so far was a safe and friendly place, but also a little isolating. There were only 4 kids in her whole class. We're introduced to her during her first year of college, her first big step out into the wider world. Yuki is sweet, but also shy and self-conscious and easily flustered when she has to try and communicate with anyone new. The story opens with Yuki being approached by a boy on the train. She thinks he was asking for directions, but I'm pretty sure he was trying to ask her out. In any case, another boy who she sort of recognizes from around school steps in and comes to her rescue, sending her admirer on his way. This newcomer is Itsuomi, and the rest of the series is focused on their love story. There's something I kind of want to get out of the way, but also it leads into one of the big things about this show that I wanted to talk about anyway. I think it's almost impossible to talk about this show without at least mentioning A Silent Voice. It's hitting me as I'm writing this that it's been almost 10 years since that movie came out, so if there are any new anime fans watching, or if you somehow missed it when it was new, A Silent Voice is about a girl who was bullied for being deaf to the point where she had to switch schools as a child. After she left, the teacher finally tried to hold someone accountable for it, and though it had very much been a group effort, they all turned on the boy who'd been the ringleader. It's a study in irony, really, or maybe just the minds of cruel, middle school-aged kids, because his reputation as a bully is how they justify turning to bully him. The story picks back up in high school, where the boys become suicidal, but he gets back in contact with the girl to apologize, make his final amends, and the two start to become friends. 2016 was a crazy summer for anime, honestly. Your Name and A Silent Voice came out within like 2 weeks of each other, and they're still the anime movies I see most recommended to people today. So, given its popularity, I think it was a little inevitable that A Sign of Affection would be compared to A Silent Voice. There is actually one little detail I want to harp on. In her flashbacks, Yuki is shown to have dark hair. She dyed it pink as an adult, and I really wish she hadn't, because it just made her look that much more like Shoko. I'd been on guard since the beginning about viewing this series as its own thing, and I still found myself referring to Yuki by the wrong name at times. But there is an aspect where that comparison works in this show's favor, the reason I wanted to bring it up and put that thought in your minds at all. A Silent Voice is a great movie, and it is a big deal that one of its main characters is deaf. I don't mean to diminish that, but the deeper I got into this show, the more I started to appreciate that A Silent Voice is really more about bullying and depression than anything else. Shoko's deafness could have been replaced with just about anything that made her stand out, and very little about the story would have changed. A Sign of Affection is a much more in-depth look into everyday life as a deaf person in Japan, and that's one of the things I loved most about it. Honestly, I wish it was told in a little more of a first-person style. We get a handful of completely silent scenes, and though I really liked the music in this show, I wish they'd played with that more. There are instances where Yuki's out with friends and they're having conversations she's not aware of, and if those were totally inconsequential conversations, I wouldn't mind, but sometimes they're dropping important lore about Itsu's past or something, and it just felt wrong to be getting that information at a time when you know Yuki's not picking it up. And I know there are countless examples of times the audience learns something before the main character does, but it just feels different under these circumstances. There were things I was just a little bit at odds with. I think this show does a great job of opening people's eyes to ways Yuki has to live her life differently, mostly without making her seem any lesser for it, but she was a little bit of a damsel in distress at times. It felt like someone was always coming to her rescue in social situations, and just once I would have liked to see the writers let her struggle through it and come to a solution herself. There's a scene near the end where she's at a grocery store. While she's in line for a cashier she recognizes, who doesn't sign but has worked out a way to communicate with her through gestures, another cashier comes up and grabs her basket, bringing it over to his register, trying to be helpful. I really liked the setup of this scene because the cashier was wearing a face mask. I don't think it's brought up enough how much harder that made it for deaf people like Yuki who usually get by reading lips. But they don't let her see this interaction through. Once again, a hearing childhood friend just happens to be in the store and jumps in and smooths things over for her. I'm a little torn because I think her tendency to freeze is in character. I already mentioned she spent most of her life in this isolated, safe little bubble where she was always surrounded by people who understood her and could speak for her. But she does want to grow and expand her world, and I wish the writers would let her. I just think the representation is important, because deaf people do get by in hearing spaces every day without having someone to hold their hand through it all. Feel free to take this all with a grain of salt, because I'm not deaf myself. I don't think Yuki's a bad portrayal of a deaf character, but there were times I found myself wishing she was a slightly more empowering one. I have been having the hardest time deciding on how I want to structure this review. It's one of those shows where every point I want to make connects back to some other point, so we'll return to Oshi, that childhood friend, in a minute. Let's talk about Itsuomi first. Despite having kind of a dry personality, Itsu's pretty popular, and understandably so. He's an interesting guy. He spent most of his childhood in Europe, is fluent in 3 languages, and is always taking off at the drop of a hat on adventures to some new country he's never seen before. But what's most important about all this is that it means he's grown fairly comfortable with being out of his element, having to communicate with someone without a shared language. So he's not intimidated by Yuki's deafness, and that has a huge impact on her, as she's used to people brushing her off as soon as they learn she can't hear. We see it happen a couple times throughout the series, too. There were some things that made me uncomfortable at first. He's very physical with her in the beginning, manhandling her to make sure she's looking in the right direction and that sort of thing. But in hindsight, I can appreciate that it was part of the learning curve, and of course there would be one. If there's one thing that can be said about Itsuomi, it's that he gets very good at asking very clear questions about what she is and isn't comfortable with, to the point where the way he phrases questions almost seemed like some kind of verbal tic. If you've been around this channel at all, you probably already know that I can be very picky and very critical of romances, and I hate love triangles. But not without exception. A Sign of Affection is the type of show that has so many overlapping love triangles that by the time you're halfway through, it's begun to look like a different shape entirely. No exaggeration, Yuki and Itsu both have a childhood friend with a crush, who in turn each has another friend with a crush. But if ever there was a story that was suited to that kind of thing, it's this one, because at its heart, A Sign of Affection is a story about communication. I know I've already said I wished Yuki's tale was a little more empowering at times, but if there was one thing that was really satisfying, it was seeing Yuki and Itsu get it right when some of the couples without a language barrier were struggling so much. I really want to talk about Oshi. While he could be a frustrating character at times, he was a very important character. Unexpectedly, this anime brought me back to a manga series I read years ago called Waiting for Spring. It too had a love triangle with a childhood friend, albeit a much more frustrating one. I'm pretty sure I said during that review that I wished I could watch just one romance without all the drama, and despite all the unrequited crushes, A Sign of Affection did feel like it delivered that. It's actually a pretty mushy, really feel-good story. There's a ton of pining, but it's pretty light on the jealousy and possessiveness that usually turns me off from these tales. Oshi cares for Yuki exactly the same way Aya cared for Mitsuki. His love is genuine, but it's selfish. He plays a very important role. He's often the one correcting other people's rudeness early on, but he also says outright that he wants to continue being her knight in shining armor, not really considering how this requires Yuki to remain in that damsel in distress role I'm hoping to see her grow out of. The way he contrasts Itsu is twofold. There's the communication aspect, ironically. Oshi started learning sign language as a child, and is actually thinking of training to be a professional interpreter, but he struggles to be honest about his feelings. It's possible to get sarcasm across through sign, but tsundereism doesn't translate so well. His crush is painfully obvious to everyone else, but Yuki tends to take his words at face value. There was actually some really great detail there about how much facial expression and that sort of thing matters in sign language. Because there's a moment where Yuki starts to catch on, noting that his words may be harsh, but the way he forms them seems almost gentle. It's just a really great comparison to look at how much more success Itsu is having, even though their conversations are a bit stilted. He's too observant to call him truly oblivious, but he can be a little dense sometimes. But most importantly, he's very straightforward, which is exactly what Yuki needs. And the other side of it, of course, is that he offers Yuki a chance to grow. The big goal in the second half of the series is that she wants to get her passport so she can join him on his next adventure, which really impressed upon me that this is one of those series where the anime is really only the first part of the story. It was adapted from a manga that's still ongoing. I suspect the growth I really wanted to see will come later. I kind of alluded to this before, but in a lot of ways, Yuki's personality right now is her deafness. We see moments when she's signing with someone fluent enough to keep up with her, where she starts to really bloom into her own person, and I'd really like to see her get to that point with Itsu. They meet in the very first scene, and are basically instantly smitten. The romance is incredibly sweet, but there were moments it felt just a little shallow. But for the most part, I'd say A Sign of Affection deserves all the praise it's gotten. I definitely recommend it to anyone who's looking for a mostly lighthearted, feel-good romance. It's a very thoughtful show. I'm glad I finally found the time to see it. Thank you for watching.